Hi. My mom spent her whole life working in an office, so I know how these places really operate. What I'm about to share isn't fiction. It's rooted in real situations. I tell these stories because there's something to learn from them. Mistakes people made before you don't have to be your mistakes. All the names, the companies, and the specifics have been changed to protect privacy. But I knew something was wrong the moment I saw my name grayed out in the system. Flagged. Inactive. No heads up, no meeting, no explanation, just gone. Like I never existed. 1 minute I was in my usual quiet corner, getting vendor renewal docs ready for legal and infops. And the next I was staring at a bright red banner blinking across my admin panel like a fire alarm. And the worst part? I wasn't even shocked. 3 days into Damien's long overdue cruise, his first vacation in 7 years, I could feel a shift in the air. The building had a different rhythm. Junior staff started giving each other anxious looks. Conversations would cut off the second I walked into the room. And now the back-end system I helped build was treating me like outdated software. Let me pause here for a second. If this story's already got your attention, do me a small favor. Hit the like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it really helps keep stories like this going. And trust me, we're just getting started. I'd been with Astronomics for 11 years. Not the kind of years that get you featured in press releases or on stage at tech expos. But when something critical broke and nobody knew how to fix it, I was the one they called. I didn't chase titles, I chased stability. I wrote out reorgs, mergers, board shakeups. I was like the company's memory drive, quiet, reliable, and invisible. Until someone hit delete. And that memory included full oversight of our licensing architecture, contractual custodianship, vendor failover systems, operational continuity. Not the sexy stuff, but the kind that keeps lawsuits away. I wasn't flashy, but I was vital. And on paper I was protected. Schedule D. Paragraph 7.4b. No termination of a named custodial role without prior CEO approval. Period. No exceptions. Buried deep in the legal infrastructure documentation, pushed through by Damien himself in 2021, right after another director tried to streamline us into a legal disaster. That clause? That was my seatbelt. And I always wore it. But Damien wasn't here. He was somewhere off the coast of Croatia, finally letting the system run itself for once. And someone had taken that as an open invitation to start climbing the ladder. His name was Chad Wellstone, Harvard MBA, recently installed interim director of operations. Loud in meetings, couldn't do subtlety if his life depended on it, and obsessed with terms like agile restructuring and legacy fatigue. You know the type. Perfect hair, fake smile, wears both a smartwatch and a leather wristband just to seem deep. He'd only been with us for about 2 weeks, but already had a whiteboard full of org chart edits, 3 VP-level roles open for something he called efficiency driving, and a calendar packed with culture audits. I didn't give him much thought. My job wasn't at the mercy of buzzwords. It was protected by contractual language. Or so I thought. That morning, I got a calendar invite. Realignment mandatory offboarding discussion. No context. No sender. Just a time and a room. Conference room 2D. I stared at it for a long minute. Then I quietly slid my legal binder into my bag and walked toward the room like I was heading to a funeral I hadn't been invited to, but was still expected to bury. When I opened the door, Chad was already there at the head of the table. On one side of him sat an HR generalist I'd never worked with. On the other, a junior legal rep who looked like she'd just come from her coffee break. No one stood. No one said hello. Chad just motioned to a chair like he was hosting a game show and I was the unlucky contestant. "Thanks for coming," he said, folding his hands like some low-budget TED speaker in an off-the-rack suit. "We're making some changes. Your role no longer aligns with the future vision of Astrodynamics," Chad said. I blinked once. Does Damien know? Chad gave me that smug little grin. He knows I'm cleaning house. He trusts me. I didn't argue. Didn't beg. I just slid my access badge across the table, calm and deliberate. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Unsigned, unfiled, and very much intentional. You might want to have legal take another look at Schedule D before this turns into something bigger. He waved me off like I was an inconvenience. We're past that. Just leave. So I stood up, grabbed my binder, and walked out. I wasn't angry. I wasn't rattled. I was calculating because Chad had no clue what that clause actually meant. But I did. And now he just triggered it. I remember exactly where I was when that invite hit my inbox, sitting in the old compliance conference room, under a flickering ceiling light that nobody ever bothered to fix. I was usually the one reminding facilities that, yes, even forgotten corners still mattered. I was halfway through the third vendor compliance renewal, the one tied to our cloud fallback agreement in Brussels, when the ping came through. Org realignment, mandatory offboarding. No subject line, no details, no explanation. And most telling of all, no mention of Damien. I clicked into the invite. It had Chad's name on it. No co-host, no notes, just him, his time, his room. His move. That's when something Damien once told me hit me like a brick. Back when we were cleaning up a compliance mess from a panicked fintech partner, he looked at me across the table and said, "You're the one who holds the stitches. If someone ever tries to cut you out, they better be ready to bleed." I had laughed. He hadn't. Just a week before I got that calendar invite, Damien had called me into his office. He looked more relaxed than usual, packing for his cruise. He was standing there trying to choose between two identical pairs of boat shoes like the fate of the trip depended on it. "I'm finally doing it," he said, tossing one pair aside. "No slack, no fires, no emergencies. Just the ocean and overpriced cocktails." I smirked. "And who's gonna babysit your inbox while you're sipping piña coladas?" "You are," he said without skipping a beat. "And I mean it. No fires. If anyone pushes back, delays, questions anything, especially the renewals, you hold the line. They're time sensitive, and no one knows the systems better than you." It wasn't anything new. That was our rhythm. I handled the licensing matrix, the compliance integrations, the fallback structures, basically the digital plumbing no one else wanted to deal with. I knew which clauses kept us in good standing with the EU, which safety nets kicked in during outages, and which triggers could undo an entire deployment. It wasn't flashy work, but if you didn't know the rules behind the system, you couldn't see where the real landmines were buried. Chad didn't know any of that. And worse, he didn't even know what he didn't know. He showed up on Damien's third day out of office. First came the company-wide email. "Please welcome Chad Wellstone, Interim Director of Operations." I skimmed his intro, Harvard pedigree, fintech startup that got acquired for way too much money, and a headshot that looked like it was taken mid-podcast while he was saying something like synergy. Day 4, he called an all-hands meeting. It was loud, full of buzzwords. We're cutting the fat, streamlining the core. Innovation needs frictionless architecture. He kept looking my way like I was his poster child for inefficiency. I didn't flinch, didn't react. I just took notes, quietly flagged every phrase that hinted at restructuring. Then I updated all my documentation, just in case someone questioned the validity of a renewal I'd already pushed through. Then came the invite. There's something surreal about seeing your entire career boiled down to a 30-minute Outlook event. Offboarding. Like it's just another meeting between a KPI review and someone's birthday cupcakes. I didn't reply. I just showed up. Because that's the trick when the wolves start circling. You don't panic, you don't bark. You just check your exits and let them think they've got you cornered. I knew for a fact Chad didn't have board clearance. And I was just as sure Damien hadn't signed off on anything. But the way Chad sat there in that meeting, grinning like he'd already won, told me everything I needed to know. He really thought he'd pulled it off. Thought I was just some relic of the old system, easy to cut, easy to forget. What he didn't realize was the very thing he dismissed as legacy was the leash already wrapped around his neck. Damien had left me with one instruction: hold the line. And now, thanks to Chad's arrogance, that line had been broken, documented, and time-stamped. He jumped the chain of command without understanding what was buried in the foundation beneath his feet. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to argue. I just needed to wait. Because what Chad didn't know was that the system was already designed to push back. And he just triggered it without even knowing it existed. The HR rep couldn't meet my eyes. She looked like she'd been handed a script and told to sit tight while someone else lit the fuse. Her hands were trembling just slightly on the folder in front of her. Like if she stayed still enough, maybe she wouldn't be held responsible for whatever came next. The guy beside her, supposedly from legal, looked like he'd just stepped out of a networking brunch. No tie, no file, no idea. He didn't even bring a copy of my contract. But Chad? Chad leaned back in his chair like this was his victory lap. He didn't bother with my name. Didn't ask how I was. Didn't thank me for 11 years of making sure his shiny dashboards didn't collapse the first time someone ignored a vendor clause. He just dove right in like he'd rehearsed it in the mirror that morning. "Effective immediately," he said, lacing his fingers together like a bad SEO impression. "We're ending your engagement. You've been here a long time. It's time to make room for new blood." Like this was a remodel. Like I was just drywall to be torn out. I blinked once. Not out of surprise but calculation. "And Damien?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even though I already knew the answer. Chad gave me that VC pitch smile. "He knows I'm cleaning house. He trusts me. I'm running things now." His confidence would have been cute if it weren't so dangerously naive. I didn't argue. Didn't defend myself. I reached into my bag, took out my badge, and slid it across the table like it was just another compliance file. Then I leaned forward slightly and said the quietest sentence in the room. "You might want to talk to legal first," and read Schedule D. The HR rep shifted in her chair like she felt the temperature drop. The junior legal guy parted his lips like he was about to speak, then shut them again, realizing he was way out of his depth. Chad just smirked. "Don't need to," he said, waving me off like I was holding up the line at a coffee shop. "Just leave." So I stood up, gathered my things, smoothed my jacket. No yelling. No accusations. Just quiet precision. Because panic is for people who don't have receipts. I wasn't leaving in disgrace. I was leaving with a fuse already lit. What Chad didn't understand, what he couldn't understand, was that Schedule D wasn't a bluff. It was a legal scaffold. Something Damien and I built specifically for moments like this. Moments when some ego-tripping newcomer tried to swing an axe without checking what the roots were tied to. I had helped write that clause, buried it 3 appendices deep, tied it to vendor continuity, custodial oversight, and CO exclusive release rights. It was board approved, incident ratified, and tracked by its own audit trail in the ops log. By the time Chad finished his little speech, the system had already logged my removal. The breach timer had already started. And somewhere, maybe in a junior compliance analyst's queue or deep inside a back-end automation, an alert had already been triggered. Nothing loud. Nothing dramatic. Just a soft internal flag that a protected custodial role had been terminated, without authorization. The kind of flag that ripples. Quietly. Systematically. And Chad had no idea what was coming. No fanfare. No fireworks. Just inevitability. As I walked out of that conference room, past the rows of glowing monitors and the murmurs that followed me, I didn't feel crushed. I felt complete. They thought it was over. But really the clause, that was just beginning. It started as a whisper. A flicker of curiosity. Somewhere deep in legal. Probably during a quiet moment between redlining procurement clauses and churning through NDAs. A junior associate named May opened the wrong folder at exactly the right time. She wasn't even looking for anything related to me. She'd been asked to double-check standard termination language for a completely unrelated staffer. But curiosity, like compliance, has a funny habit of surfacing exactly when it's most inconvenient. Buried in that folder was a subsection almost no one touched, unless someone was being onboarded at the custodial level. And that didn't happen often. On page 3 of Schedule D, Clause 7.4b, highlighted in soft yellow was my name, my role, and a line of text no one in that building would ever be able to unsee. Termination of custodial personnel designated in Schedule D shall require written CEO authorization in advance of offboarding or operational reassignment. Failure to secure written approval shall trigger governance review and automatic audit. And directly underneath, added in 2021 after a nasty vendor lawsuit, unauthorized termination of Schedule D custodians shall carry financial penalty for breach of governance, no less than $500,000 to be assessed against the initiating authority. In plain English, Chad had just stepped on a landmine in loafers. May brought the clause to her manager, who froze halfway through stirring his coffee. He read it once, then again. Then he walked fast and no rain to the director of legal ops, who was on a totally unrelated call about onboarding language for our new South American procurement hub. He didn't wait for a pause, just held up the document. "What's this?" he asked. "That's Schedule D," May replied. The key custodian clause. She flagged it herself on the way out. She who? Lena. The director stared at the page like it had just stabbed him in the back. When? An hour ago. She's gone. Who signed her off? Chad. No CEO co-signature. Silence. Not the confused kind. The kind where everyone suddenly gets it. See, governance triggers weren't just procedural checkboxes. They were compliance fire alarms wired into the core of the company. The moment a Schedule D custodian was terminated without proper authorization, the system didn't wait to ask questions. It flagged the breach. Automatically. Instantly. And if it wasn't reversed within 48 hours? It escalated. To board review. Publicly. No PR filters. No corporate spin. No oops are bad. And the worst part? That flag would hit the board's governance digest Monday morning. Under pending risk events - and right beside it would be the clause stating the board couldn't override it. They only got to ask one thing. Who authorized the offboarding? Someone finally broke the tension in that office. Barely a whisper. Did he get Damien's approval? The air in the room just vanished. Like someone had cracked a pressure seal. No one moved. No one answered. Because they all knew the truth. Damien hadn't just missed the offboarding. He'd been in the middle of the damn ocean. No signal. No Slack. No emergency calls. The whole point of that cruise was to disappear for once, to unplug. And Chad, in all his fresh-suited confidence, thought unplugged meant unprotected. He didn't read the clause. Didn't consult legal. Didn't even hesitate. He thought I was just infrastructure. He had no idea the woman who managed operational licensing and custodial governance for 5 years had her role embedded in a contract, with teeth. And now it was too late. The offboarding had already gone through our internal tracking system OpsLog. That meant the timestamp was real. The trigger was active. And now 3 different departments, HR, legal and inframpliance, were staring at the same problem. And none of them had the clearance to undo what was already in motion. Nobody wanted to be the one to call Chad and say, "Hey, you just set off a $500,000 landmine and triggered a formal audit. All because you fired the wrong person." And meanwhile, in the background, the system just kept doing what it was built to do: quiet, detached, methodical. No emotion. No drama. Just protocol and documentation. Because the trap wasn't in what Chad did - it was in what he didn't read - By late afternoon, it wasn't just legal in a panic. Everyone even remotely tied to governance, risk, or investor relations was now circling. The kind of people who walk into a room and make coffee go cold just by their expression. The kind who make legal pads bleed ink. The breach clock had started ticking the moment Chad clicked "Submit termination" in OpsLog. And the system, precise, emotionless, had already timestamped the event in 3 separate places. HRIS, Legal Sync, and the Governance Oversight module. That kind of redundancy is meant to protect a company. Unless you're the one who tripped it. Someone from governance compliance, a woman named Amani, who'd been quietly auditing Schedule D roles for 2 years, dug up a policy memo from 2021. She pulled it straight from the board archive. The same memo Damien had signed personally, after a disastrous Q3 where the quiet termination of a systems architect caused a vendor chain downgrade. The memo was blunt. If a Schedule D custodial offboarding was submitted without written CEO approval, it had to be reversed within 48 hours. No debate. No delay. No let's talk it through. Reverse it, or the board must be notified. Along with internal audit, general counsel, and investor relations. Translation: this wasn't just a mistake. It was a governance event. That's when someone called in Mason, the guy from IR who wore tailored vests like they made his inbox lighter. He walked into the room, listened for maybe 30 seconds, then raised a hand. "If this breach isn't contained," he said, "we're legally required to include it in the Q4 risk statement." Legal went pale. "And if it affects our audit readiness," Mason added, "we might have to file an 8K addendum, especially if custodial integrity is in question." That's material. HR tried to jump in, saying Chad had verbal approval. "Then where's the memo?" someone asked. Crickets. No Slack message. No time-stamped call. No calendar invite. No meeting notes. Nothing. All they had was the system-generated termination letter, and signed by Damien and signed by board counsel. Just a templated doc, created by Chad's admin and pushed live without ever cross-checking Schedule D. And Imani, she wasn't done. She ran a cross-reference through the compliance license tracker. This is worse, she said, eyes still on her screen. Her custodial role is linked to 3 active vendor fallback protocols. One of them is tied to a continuity clause that only she had signing authority for. She looked up. If she's gone, the renewal with Eastbridge data is void. Everyone in the room froze. That clause wasn't just internal. It had external hooks. If Eastbridge found out their fallback protocol had lapsed due to unauthorized custodial offboarding, they'd have legal grounds to suspend SLA obligations. That would trigger another breach, this time in operations, which would tank client trust metrics. Dominoes. Expensive ones. Mason leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling like it might have answers. And you're saying we've got, what? 43 hours. 42 now, Imani replied, already updating the tracker. They tried calling Chad. His assistant said he was on a partner call, probably still pitching some feel-good culture reform, while half the company's compliance framework burned behind him. Imani flagged the clause again. There's no wiggle room here, she said. If we don't reverse the termination before the clock runs out, the board can't even shield it. We'll have to declare the breach. That line dropped like a weight in the room, and everyone knew exactly what came next. Once that breach went on record, our audit coverage rating would drop below the acceptable threshold. And the investor call? Someone asked. When's that, Monday? Nobody answered out loud. But we all knew. If that breach showed up in Monday's governance digest, the optics alone would gut our Q4 projections 7 figures easily. Not because of what actually happened, but because of what it looked like. A company that terminated its own system custodian during the CEO's vacation. Without reading the damn clause. Panic kicked into high gear. Teams started digging through everything. Old contracts, internal emails, archived Slack threads, audit reports, Damien's personal meeting notes, desperately looking for anything that might pass as approval. A voice memo, a calendar reminder, even a casual "Sure, Chad, take care of it while I'm gone." But there was nothing. Not a single breadcrumb. Because Damien didn't trust off-the-cuff approvals. He trusted systems. And right now, that system was loading up to eat Chad alive. Friday, 11:12 a.m. That was the moment it all locked in. The ping came through like any other message. No high priority tag, no bold font. Just a quiet note from Tasha, a mid-level compliance specialist working the governance queue. Clause 7.4b auto-triggers an irrevocable flag once termination is logged in ops log. Even if reversed, it still counts. Clock's already locked. 16 words. But they may as well have been carved in stone. Until that second, legal had been clinging to hope. If they moved fast enough, got Damien to backdate something, undelete my name from the system, patch the paper trail, maybe, just maybe, they could dodge the fallout. But Clause 7.4b wasn't written to bite. It was written to sever. It was born out of blood, the 2019 Hawker collapse, when a senior director fired a licensing custodian mid-integration, triggering $12.6 million in SLA penalties. After that disaster, the clause was crafted for one thing: finality. Once a Schedule D custodial termination was logged in ops log, it didn't matter what your intentions were. The system didn't care if you meant well or changed your mind. The breach was recorded. And breach state? That's what the board reads. Every Monday, 9:01 a.m. sharp. Every flag. Every timestamp. Every screw-up. And Chad? Chad had already pulled the pin. Now the grenade was humming underneath the governance table, just waiting for the board to sit down and see the blinking red light. Legal's group chat exploded. Tell me this isn't permanent. What if Damien gives retroactive approval? That doesn't clear the audit flag. Ops log timestamped the breach at 9:47 a.m. Thursday. Audit freeze already triggered. So even if we rehire her? Doesn't matter. The clause doesn't care about the person. It cares about the breach. Panic, now fully credentialed, was pacing the halls in designer shoes. And meanwhile, across town, Chad was living it up. Overpriced sushi, rooftop views, some neon-lit Instagram lounge with seaweed cocktails and LED chopsticks. He was mid-lunch with a recruiter from an enterprise SaaS firm, casually dropping phrases like strategic overhaul and legacy systems. He even called me dead weight between bites, laughed like he just discovered a new productivity secret. She didn't even fight it, he told the recruiter. Just walked out. I think she knew her time was up. Then he paused, checked his phone and saw the missed calls. He rolled his eyes. Probably legal fussing about compliance overkill. He joked. The recruiter smiled, clueless. Back at HQ it was anything but funny. The head of risk had joined the war room. So had the VP of strategy. And someone had finally brought in general counsel, who walked in wearing a half-zip jacket and a face full of fury. He read the clause. Once. Then again. Then looked up and asked flatly. He what? No one said a word. By now, everyone understood the truth. There was no fix, no clever workaround, no backdoor save. It was over. Even if Damien flew back that very second and gave a glowing speech about how critical I was to system continuity, even if I agreed to return under a shiny new contract, even if Chad staged a 3-part apology tour complete with humble pie and corporate repentance, it wouldn't change a thing. The system had already spoken. The flag was live. And once the board laid eyes on it, a full governance review would be triggered automatically. No discussions. No veto. Just policy doing exactly what it was built to do. Chad didn't know it yet, but that sushi lunch? That rooftop conversation? That was the last meal he'd enjoy as interim director of operations. Because the clause didn't just reveal his arrogance, it made it permanent. At exactly 2:47 p.m. the building changed. Not with sirens. Not with raised voices. But with one sound, a single ping dash. The kind that cuts through ambient office noise like a scalpel through silk. The message hit Legal's secure line, tagged with Damien's encrypted signature. Subject. What did you do? No greeting. No pleasantries. Just that. Rage locked in all caps, barely contained by a few lines of text. The body of the message? 2 lines. Just saw the ops log flag. Schedule debreach. Is this a joke? Call me now. You could almost hear the ice water dump over the entire war room. Every keyboard went still. Every monitor screen held its breath. The only sound was Mason from IR, quietly exhaling as he whispered, "Oh, that's not good." Someone turned to the governance lead. Does he know it was Chad? She didn't even hesitate. He does now, she said, already rising from her chair. They finally found Chad mid-elevator ride, phone in hand, chatting away about his first big internal pivot. He was grinning like always, that corporate smug kind of grin that says, "I've got this dash," because he's the one holding the marker at the whiteboard. The elevator doors opened, and 3 people from legal were already approaching. 2 held printed docs. One had a laptop open to the audit log. "Damien's on secure line 4, one of them said. Chad raised an eyebrow, still playing it cool. Did the board already see it? No, someone replied. But he did. From the boat. That finally landed. Chad's face flickered. He stepped into a private huddle room and took the call, probably expecting a little tough love. Maybe a few sharp words about pacing. Something he could smooth over. What he got was ice. "You fired the person who holds the system's spine," Damien said. Each word slow and deliberate like surgical incisions, while I was on a boat. Chad hesitated. His voice cracked, pitched too high. "We were mid-review. There were real inefficiencies, Damien. I thought you'd want." "You thought dash." Silence. "I told you to observe while I was away," Damien said, voice low but lethal. "You had -1 instruction. No structural changes without my sign-off. You interpreted that as clearance to terminate the most contract-entangled custodial lead we have." Chad tried to recover. "Look, this wasn't personal. I was streamlining. She was part of the..." Damien didn't yell. He didn't have to. One word. Flat. Final. "Stop." There was a pause. You could hear the ocean wind in the background. Then the sound of papers shifting. Damien's tone softened but somehow got sharper. "You activated a clause designed to prevent executive overreach." "I didn't see the clause." "Exactly, dash." More silence. Then Damien laid it out, calm and cold. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to keep your mouth shut. No more public meetings. No more org changes. No more whiteboard strategy sessions filled with half-baked KPIs. We're locking all administrative access to your account. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. HR will call you at 5 o'clock on the dot. They'll ask if you'd like to resign. Chad stammered. But they'll be polite. Then a click dash. Damien didn't slam the phone. He just disconnected. Clean. Like unplugging a power cord mid-sentence. Chad stared at the blank screen, pale and frozen. No more smirking. He stepped out of the room like he'd aged 10 years in 4 minutes. No eye contact. No swagger. Just slow, stunned steps back to his office, where someone was already boxing up his desk. Not out of spite. Just process. Like it had already been written in the company's timeline. Because up on the top floor? It had. Legal was already drafting the resignation terms. HR had quietly pulled the clean template from the termination with cause drawer. One they rarely used but always kept ready. And over on the investor prep call for Monday, Mason updated the governance notes with one small but crucial phrase. Breach mitigated. The smirk was gone. The tide had turned. And the boat? Still sailing. Monday, 8:03 a.m., meeting room 4C. No nameplates. No coffee. No printed agenda. Just 6 chairs. 1 folder. And enough tension to peel paint off the glass walls. Even the badge readers at the door seemed to beep more quietly than usual. Damien walked in right on the .com, rested, suntanned from 12 days of Mediterranean air. No jacket. No tie. Just a slate gray polo and the same watch he'd worn since before the IPO. But even dressed down, his presence carried weight. He didn't shake hands. Didn't nod. Didn't sit. He walked straight to the head of the table. Show me the clause. Legal was ready. A senior counsel slid the printed Schedule D packet across the table. Clause 7.4b. Subsection 3 boxed in blue. Highlighted. Tabbed. Damien read it once. Then again. When he looked up, it wasn't at legal. It was at Chad. You signed off on this? Damien asked, voice flat as polished steel. Chad sat at the far end of the table. Smaller than usual, suit rumpled, tie crooked. His face was flushed with the gray-pink exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept in 2 days. He opened his mouth, thought better of it, nodded. Yes. Damien didn't blink. Then you'll sign this too. He reached into his folder and placed a crisp resignation form on the table. 2 copies. One already filled out. The other blank for appearance. Chad stared at it. You, Damien? I. Damien raised a hand. Not to silence but to pause. This isn't about Lena, he said quietly. It's about you deciding you knew better than the structure we spent 10 years building. I didn't know about the clause. Not exactly. A long beat. No one moved. I hired you to observe, to listen, to support continuity while I stepped away. What you did was sever a critical custodial line, invalidate an active vendor agreement, trigger an irrevocable audit flag, and almost force a risk disclosure 48 hours before the investor call. Damien didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. All because you thought you could clean house before understanding the plumbing. Chad looked like he wanted to argue. But the air was gone. The defense was gone. The room had already moved on. Let me be clear, Damien continued. You didn't just terminate the wrong person. You terminated the -1 person who fully understood what you were doing, and who built systems designed to expose it the second you tried. He gestured toward the resignation form again. You sign, you leave quietly. You keep your severance, your references, your LinkedIn headline. A pause. You don't sign, and this becomes a board matter. Then an investor matter. Then a legal one. Chad's eyes flicked to legal. No sympathy. Just protocol. He signed. 3 quick strokes of the pen. Silence. Damien gave a small nod. Your access is already suspended. Security will walk you out. Don't stop at your office. Your personal items will be mailed. He paused for a beat. And I'd recommend logging off Slack. Before you see what's trending. Chad stood awkwardly. He looked around like he was hoping anyone would make eye contact. Throw him a lifeline. A nod of solidarity. But no one did. Because the throne had never been empty. He'd just mistaken a vacation for abdication. And now, the real director was back. Not to gloat, not to punish, just to clean up the mess efficiently, permanently. The meeting ended at 8:19. By 8:21, Chad's name disappeared from the internal directory. And by 8:27, the staff-wide email went out. We thank Chad Wellstone for his time with Astra Dynamics and wish him well in his future endeavors. By 8:34, Damien leaned back in his chair, looked over at legal and said, "Now let's make sure the people who actually understand this place never get blindsided again." The room finally exhaled. The line had held, and the lesson had been carved into the foundation. By the time Friday rolled around, the office had returned to its usual rhythm, at least on the surface. Meetings picked back up. Dashboards loaded. Emails went out, each one laced with those cheerful Happy Friday exclamation points like nothing had happened. But underneath, something had shifted. People sat up a little straighter. They read contracts a little slower. They asked one more question before signing off. Because now they knew. Chad's name was gone. Scrubbed completely from the internal directory. No profile. No farewell post. Not even a cached mention in Slack. Just erased. His office. Cleared out overnight. Boxes sealed, labeled return to sender dash. HR acted like it had always been empty. And most people acted like they'd never really bought into his buzzwords anyway. The board issued a dry, carefully worded memo. Leadership reinstatement. Oversight remediation. No mention of a breach. No names. No nod to me. But everyone knew what it meant. No press release. No applause. Just the quiet, procedural hum of an institution correcting itself. But the real story? It lived in the quarterly report. Tucked inside Section 3.2c, wedged between cash flow projections and departmental charts, sat a single footnote. All offboarding actions must adhere to custodial governance. Unauthorized terminations may trigger systemic breach status. That was it. No names. No incident recap. Just an echo. But echoes carry when the system is built right. I didn't return. Not out of bitterness. Not to make a point. Just because I was done. The clause I'd helped draft 5 years earlier, at 11:42 p.m. after a vendor escalation nearly cost us an SLA agreement, had already walked me out the door with everything that mattered still intact. My reputation. My records. And my place in the blueprint that outlasted the guy who thought he could outmaneuver it. Later, someone from Risk told me the board held a closed session on custodial structures. They added 2 new roles to Schedule D. Reinstated the regular review cadence. Someone even floated the idea of naming the clause after me. I declined. Let the paperwork speak. Because real power? It isn't in the room. It's in the rules written long before the room gets loud. That's what Chad never understood. He thought volume was vision. That leadership meant the loudest person in the meeting. That firing someone during a CEO's vacation was bold, instead of reckless. But I didn't need a title to win. I just needed a clause no one else bothered to read. And now it's exactly where it belongs. Buried deep in governance. Invisible to those who only skim the surface looking for shortcuts. Let them skim. I'll keep writing the footnotes.